fertile, vast land, vast everything for agriculture, but little development. What can we look forward to with you being in office?
Well, first and foremost is the fact that agriculture for a long time used to be what we had in Nigeria. In fact, if you look at it in terms of the Nigeria in the 60s, Nigeria accounted for the 47% of global production of groundnuts, highest in the world. Today we're down to zero on that. We were 18% of the global production of cocoa. In fact, a lot of the infrastructure you find in western, southwest Nigeria, southeast Nigeria came out of cocoa. We were number one in the world. Today we're down to 8%. And if you take a look in terms of also the other commodity, cotton, we were largest in West Africa. We've lost that market. But also, if you look in terms of palm oil production, we were 27% of global production, bigger than Malaysia. Malaysia got its oil palm seedlings from Nigeria. Today they earn $18 billion, and we import from them. So that is what happened structurally when Nigeria found oil. It abandoned agriculture and became a unimodal economy. Now what we are doing right now is to say, look, we've got to reduce the vulnerability of our economy by depending on just one commodity.
That's right.
Secondly is that it doesn't really make sense anymore for Nigeria to be importing so much food. We spend $10 billion a year importing basic food, wheat, rice, sugar, and fish. Okay, we cannot sustain that because the more we do that, the more jobs we export. We don't create jobs at home. So as a government, we're taking the position that we must diversify the economy. We must reduce our dependence on food imports. We must also earn a lot more in terms of foreign exchange from agriculture and create jobs, create a lot of jobs. So what we're doing in Nigeria right now is taking agriculture in Nigeria back to its glory days, making Nigeria a global player in agriculture. And for that to happen, my job is to make sure that we turn around the paradigm itself. Agriculture is not a development program. For decades in Nigeria, we've treated it like a social sector, right? But it's a business. That's why other people can send us food and their farmers have a lot of money because it's a business. But for us, it's been treated as something like a social sector. So right now in Nigeria, agriculture is no longer a development project. It is a business. Agriculture is being treated with a lot of seriousness around investments. It's really also about how we develop new institutions to make Nigeria's agriculture competitive. So what we have done is that we've launched what's called agricultural transformation agenda for Mr. President.
I was coming to that, but
Right.
go ahead.
But that agenda is basically to add 20 million metric tons of food to the domestic food supply and to create 3.5 million jobs. And of course to reduce the import, in particular of wheat and also of rice. You take a look at Nigeria for decades.
Yes.
Those that made money in agriculture made it through rent seeking via the fertilizer procurement and distribution system. And the way the system worked is that the federal government will procure fertilizers and distribute fertilizers via the states. But in fact, no more than 11% of farmers were getting that government procured and distributed fertilizer. It was a very, very corrupt system.
Yes.
And those that were benefiting were the large political farmers. Yeah, they were also the rent seekers, the middlemen, and the fertilizer was making its way to Niger, to Mali, to Burkina Faso.
But
right?
not Nigeria.
And sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, they will supply sand as fertilizers, right, to farmers. Now, when we came on board, Mr. President, because of his determination to have a transparent government and good governance, directed that we must clean up that system. And my job was to do that.
Okay. So how are you doing that?
Well, first and foremost, it took us 90 days, only 90 days, to dismantle that system that has been there for some 40 years.
Okay.
We took government out completely, out of procurement and distribution of fertilizers. Because see, fertilizers not different from Pepsi Cola and Fanta in this sense that they are commodities. They're supposed to be sold to the eventual consumer directly, not via government. So there was no reason that you would find fertilizers, Pepsi Cola and Fanta in rural areas, but you won't find fertilizers. Why? The companies were selling their own Fanta and Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola, but government was trying to sell fertilizers. So now in Nigeria, for the federal government, all fertilizer and seed sales are done directly to farmers, not to government. Secondly, is that we have changed our support system for farmers to access the seed and the fertilizer. Government provides subsidies, as all governments around the world does. But what we've done is that we've said we cannot continue to provide subsidies for farmers you don't know. And so the first thing we did was to develop a database with biometric information of our farmers. This year we did 4.5 million farmers. Farmers, with all their biometric information. That is your age, your sex, gender, your size of your farm, what you crop, and all that. So now we know the farmers, so we can target them better. So to target them, we move to what is called growth enhancement support. Basically what that means is we deliver subsidies for seeds and fertilizers to farmers directly through their mobile phones. So we develop what's called electronic wallet. So in Nigeria today, farmers get their subsidized seeds and fertilizers via their mobile phone. We are the only country, first country I know of in Africa, probably in the world, that delivers subsidies to farmers directly over their mobile phones, and for good reason. Nigeria has 100 million phones, and we've got to use that to make sure we can reach them better. The other thing that we've done is that we've also been able to leverage financing for the seed companies and the fertilizer companies. This year, the Minister of Finance did a terrific job with us in raising a guarantee facility. We simply reduced the risk of lending by banks to the seed companies and the fertilizer companies. And this year they lent, we were able to leverage 30 billion naira from our banks to the seed and fertilizer companies to finance the entire supply of inputs this year without spending 1 naira of government. That's the first time in our history. So it's a lot of structural things. We didn't, same thing also with seed. In the seed sector, the government has always monopolized it. Monopolies are bad. And so what we've done is that we've taken the government out of that monopoly and we've turned it over to the private sector. And that's the way it should be.
Now, you've talked about the bond that was raised by the finance minister, the assistance there. How do ordinary farmers in the rural areas, how do they access this support that's available for them?
Well, three things for the farmers that's very important is that the farmers get access to the inputs because it's the basis in which you have to raise their productivity. So the delivery system works through what we call agro dealers. These are the small, mom and pop shops that are in the rural areas that are selling multiple products. They're the ones that we use to get the seeds and fertilizers directly. So as a farmer, you can get it right in front of, in your own village. Maybe sometimes just 2 houses from you, you can get an agro dealer. That way you reduce the distance that the farmers travel, sometimes from about almost 50 kilometers, about 5 kilometers or less by that model. So it's about accessibility. Now, the other one is about affordability. Now, the affordability question comes from access to finance. Now, we have microfinance banks that lend to farmers. We have an agricultural bank that provides loans to farmers. I must say that the rate of interest that is still charged is very, very high. The interest rate from commercial banks in Nigeria is 53%, and 23%. And at 23%, except you're doing some kind of funny business, you can't make money in agriculture. So we are working on that. We are reducing the risk of lending by banks. So this year, for example, the facility that you talked about, I just talked about, reduces the risk of lending to banks by 70%. That is, if they lose 70% money, we actually pay them that money back.
Okay.
You know, so that they can lend to farmers at single-digit interest rate. The third benefit for the farmers is how the markets themselves are organized. So we're working quite a lot to link farmers in groups to markets, to providing information so that they can have off-takers, companies that can buy their produce, so that way they can have a much more assured market. Because in agriculture, getting input is only one part of a big picture. You must be able to produce it and have a good market for and a good price for what you're selling.
Now, this year, I think it was in April or March, UNIDO launched their agro business pack in Nigeria. How is Nigeria buying into that to be able to, use those models with their farmers to again, further growth development? How is that working?
The agro
business UNIDO launched.
Yeah. Well, basically, if you look at the aggregation model, you have a lot of produce that is going on, and most of those produce are fresh produce. So if you harvest your cassava and if you don't process it within 24 hours, you lose it. If you get in, onions and you can't sell it quickly, you lose it, or tomato that you can't process, you lose it. So it's very important to have processing centers closer to farmers. So the fundamental thing that we are doing is to create agro-processing platforms for farmers all across the country. There's something we're working on right now that's called staple crop processing zones. These are zones that you have high levels of production going on, that we need to attract the private sector into those zones to process, to add value and reduce post-harvest losses. So we are putting in place those zones and upgrading power, water and roads immediately into those areas, because the cost of infrastructure is very expensive and you can't put roads and power and water everywhere. It has to be concentrated. So that's why we've gone to that model of the staple crop processing zones. And I must say that I'm very delighted that a lot of private sector in Nigeria are responding to the fiscal incentives that government is given. Many of them, if you take, for example, Tony Elumelu in Nigeria, one of our foremost investors in Nigeria, has invested a lot of money from a Transcorp group into a company in Benue that's called Terra Agro. The Terra Agro is actually processing and adding value to juice, for oranges and so on in Benue State. So we need more like that. I appreciate it. Thank you.